everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com and it's time to talk about Survivor Series. I put a tweet out just before shooting this video where I asked people if they thought this was the best non-NXT WWE pay-per-view of 2019, although of course NXT were very much at the forefront as a brand. Hashtag brand supremacy. And the response seemed to be pretty positive, and I am inclined to agree. I thought this was a really fun pay-per-view from start to finish. Lots of incident, lots of excellent wrestling as well. Obviously 1 or 2 weak points too, but I really enjoyed it as a show from start to finish. It's capped off an excellent weekend of wrestling. Now, let's talk about it. This is what happened at Survivor Series 2019. Now I'm going to try and keep this video as short and succinct as I possibly can, but that's probably not going to happen because there was loads of stuff that went down, especially in those elimination matches. But let's start with the pre-show and the tag team battle royal for brand supremacy. Of course, that was very much a theme of the night. The teams in this tag team battle royal were the best tag team in the world, the OC, the Revival, the Forgotten Sons, Roode and Ziggler, the Street Profits, Hawkins and Ryder, Breezango, the Lucha House Party represented by Lince Dorado and Gran Metalik, Imperium represented by Fabian Eichner and Marcel Bartel, and heavy machinery. Lots of teams, lots of wrestlers. Let's see who won. Well, it wasn't the Forgotten Sons because they were gone pretty much immediately, swiftly followed by my boy, Lince Dorado. I thought he was going to be the standout star of Survivor Series, and I'm heartbroken that it wasn't the case. People were getting eliminated pretty swiftly, regardless really of which brands they were representing. Even NXT, who had a pretty strong showing throughout Survivor Series this year, but not so much on this pre-show. In fact, it all came down to Raw versus SmackDown as nature intended. The Street Profits and Ziggler and Roode. The final few seconds of this match were really exciting in my opinion, and it all culminated with Montez Ford hitting a huge frog splash onto Dolph Ziggler, a turning frog splash like RVD himself. But as Ford popped up to celebrate the excellent frog splash he'd just done, Bobby Roode ran along and eliminated him from behind to solidify the victory for Team SmackDown. 1-0 to the big old blue brand. Next up, still on the pre-show, Cruiserweight champion Lio Rush from NXT taking on SmackDown's Kalisto and Raw's Akira Tozawa. This was your typical sort of 205 Live style pre-show match, with the crowd, once again, as we've seen on so many pre-shows, not really being into it at the start, but then getting slowly more invested because of the excellent and hard work of the 3 men involved. There were some great spots like a double Spanish fly onto Lio Rush while he was perched on the top rope. There was Kalisto breaking up a pinfall attempt, but somehow turning it into his own pinfall attempt in like one smooth maneuver. That was really cool to see, and a reminder that even though Kalisto is often overlooked, he's still an excellent technical wrestler. In fact, Kalisto built up a huge head of steam towards the end of this match, and it looked for a second like he was going to win, hitting the Salida del Sol onto Akira Tozawa, but then Lio Rush came off with the final hour frog splash from the top rope and retained his Cruiserweight Championship. This made the score 1-1-0, with the Raw brand still being on a big old 0, but that kind of telegraphed the final match of the pre-show for me because it seemed pretty likely that they'd, level up the scores heading into the main portion of the show for anybody tuning in just for the main bit. And the final match of the pre-show was the clash of the 3 brands' tag team champions. The New Day from SmackDown taking on the Viking Raiders from Raw and the Undisputed Era from NXT, represented in this match, of course, by Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly. Air guitaring his way down the ramp, we absolutely love to see it. The Viking Raiders busted out their special pay-per-view attire for this match, coming down dressed as, right, I know very little about Warhammer, but I think they were dressed as followers of Khorne, one of the Chaos Gods. I should probably text Sam and ask him, because he'll know. Although it is about sort of 3:30, like 4 a.m. our time right now, he might not appreciate it very much. I think they were followers of Khorne. If you know your Warhammer, let me know in the comment section down below. This marked the first example as well of commentary playing up the fact that NXT or various NXT superstars were going to be really beaten down and tired from War Games the night before. Obviously, the Undisputed Era took part in that War Games match, but despite them all being beaten down and stuff, I have to say it didn't really hinder NXT too much in this show. I don't think that was an example of lazy booking. I think it actually had a positive effect and made the NXT superstars seem really tough and strong. And cool as well, that's always important. This match had all the moves, far too many for me to remember, but it did begin to pick up, particularly down the stretch towards the end of the bout. The New Day looked the most dangerous team for various points of this match, and towards the end it did look like they may be able to pull out the victory, but they were taken out systematically. Big E was taken out in the ring by the Viking Raiders, and on the outside Kofi was taken out by a lovely high-low combination from O'Reilly and Fish. They went for the same move on Ivar in the... Ivar? I can never get that right. They went for the same move on Hansen in the ring. He cartwheeled out of the way though, burst through the pair of them off the ropes, and basically this all led to the Viking Raiders hitting the Viking Experience and picking up the big victory to level the scores at 1-1-1 heading into the main show. The first match of the main show was the women's traditional Survivor Series match, or not so traditional I guess, because there was a third team involved, NXT. I've written down the members of the team so I don't have to remember 15 names off the top of my head. Team SmackDown was Sasha Banks, Lacey Evans, Carmella, Nikki Cross and Dana Brooke. Raw was Charlotte Flair, Asuka, Kairi Sane, Natalya and Sarah Logan. Good to see her back on the scene. Where on earth has she been? And Team NXT was Rhea Ripley, Io Shirai, Candice LeRae, Bianca Belair and Toni Storm. Now it is worth pointing out that 4 of the NXT women's team actually battled each other last night in that War Games match. Rhea Ripley and Candice LeRae on one side and Io Shirai and Bianca Belair on the other side, and they didn't really reference that at all in the match. I mean, it was flagged up on commentary, but they didn't fall out at all in the match. There was no pushing and shoving. It was all just very smooth sailing, and I did find that a little bit questionable. Towards the start of the match, Kairi Sane from Raw and Io Shirai from NXT made good on their little standoff on NXT earlier this week and had a little battle in the middle of the ring. Carmella tried to get involved and went like, "Pay attention to me," and they just attacked her and then carried on because, you know, what are you doing, Carmella? This is serious. This goes back to Stardom, Carmella. But it didn't last for too long. The action spilled to the outside, and that is where both Io Shirai and Candice LeRae were taken to the back because they were just too beaten down and battered from War Games the night before. I know that I've just said that it didn't really inhibit NXT team members across the course of Survivor Series, but as you'll see in a little while, didn't really inhibit them either. So NXT were down to 3 members, but it didn't stop Bianca Belair from eliminating Nikki Cross with a cheeky roll-up with her feet on the ropes for leverage, and Rhea Ripley was on the outside holding Belair's feet down to help her secure the pinfall. Bye, Nikki. Good effort, mate. Sorry to see you go. Bianca managed to get a second elimination not long after, hitting a nice 450 on Sarah Logan, and then Charlotte Flair was able to eliminate Carmella with a natural selection of sorts. It was a bit weird, it was from the side, it didn't look like a normal natural selection, but we'll let it slide because it's Survivor Series. Kairi Sane then hit her amazing, incredible elbow drop onto Toni Storm, but for some reason Sasha Banks broke up the subsequent pinfall attempt with a Meteora, and fair enough, it did get the pinfall on Kairi Sane and eliminate her from the match, but why didn't Sasha just wait a few seconds, wait for Toni to be eliminated, and then hit the Meteora? Maybe Kairi wouldn't have been at the right angle or something. It wasn't that important in the grand scheme of things, Jack. Come on now. All teams now had 3 members, but not for very long because Asuka just ended Dana Brooke with a lovely spinning kick, and it looked pretty bleak for Team SmackDown. This is where Charlotte Flair and Asuka got into a bit of a scuffle because Charlotte decided to blind tag herself in off the back of Asuka, and Asuka didn't take too kindly to that. Charlotte dragged her down by the hair, so Asuka misted her in the face, and Charlotte was unable to see, walked right into a women's right from Lacey Evans, and was eliminated from the match. And Asuka just decided to leave. She was like, "I've had enough of this, I'm off," and she walked out, and that meant that Team Raw were down to just Natalya. But Natalya was able to rally and roll up Lacey Evans for the elimination, and then it was Toni Storm eliminated thanks to a nice sharpshooter slash bank statement combination from Natalya and Sasha. Sasha and Natalya then formed a bit of an unofficial alliance, Raw and SmackDown teaming up to take it to NXT. Maybe they're jealous of NXT's popularity with the smart crowd. Or maybe not. But anyway, they hit a cheeky little Heart Foundation move, and that was enough to put Bianca Belair away. And then Natalya just called Bianca a bitch about 5 times. She was like, "Yeah, have that bitch, bye bitch." And I was just like, what's Natalya got against Bianca? Calm down. But the Sasha-Natalya alliance didn't last for very long, actually. It was all a ruse from Sasha Banks, who spun Natalya around when she was distracted, focusing on Rhea Ripley, and dropped her with a right hand, maybe even just a big right forearm. And that was enough to pin Natalya. And I was like, whoa, that was a bit surprising. Made Natalya look a little bit weak in my opinion, but the long and short of it is that Team Raw were eliminated from the match. This meant it was all down to Sasha Banks versus Rhea Ripley, but it wasn't, because Candice and Io Shirai came back to ringside. Was it all a ruse? Was it all a plan? A tactic from NXT? It's almost like they're led by some kind of cerebral assassin of sorts. I don't know, but they really had a sound strategy coming into this. With the numbers advantage, it wasn't long before Team NXT were able to pick off Sasha Banks and secure the victory. They rescued Rhea Ripley from the Banks statement, and it was Rhea who was able to finish off Sasha with the Riptide. What a week it's been for Rhea Ripley. First of all, she pinned Charlotte Flair on SmackDown, then she won that War Games match at NXT, and then finally, she's pinned Sasha Banks to win the Survivor Series match for her team. This was a really enjoyable match in my opinion, and I made the score 2-1-1 to Team NXT, but at the same time, I do have to question the idea of Team NXT being all best friends just 24 hours after absolutely kicking the living daylights out of each other in that demonic War Games structure. Yeah, don't know how I feel about it. Next up, the battle of the secondary, champions on each brand. Roderick Strong from NXT taking on AJ Styles from Raw and Shinsuke Nakamura from SmackDown, accompanied as always by Sami Zayn. The crowd seemed pretty into this despite the heel versus heel dynamic, but I think personally I was most impressed by Roderick Strong here. He's just got all the suplexes and all the backbreakers. He's a really well-rounded wrestler and he always puts on really entertaining bouts. All three guys got a chance to shine at various points, and even Sami Zayn did as well, at one stage rescuing Shinsuke from the ring and rolling him to the outside for a little rest. Sami Zayn's a great manager and an even better best friend. Case in point, at one stage Nakamura was setting up Roddy Strong for the Kinshasa, but AJ Styles grabbed his leg on the outside, but then Sami Zayn was there to shove AJ into the ring post, just again proving his amazing best friend credentials. Watch out Chucky T and Trent Beretta and Orange Cassidy, although he's not the most enthusiastic of friends really, is he? Eventually, Nakamura was able to hit the Kinshasa on Roderick Strong, but AJ Styles was there to break up the pinfall attempt at the very last second, and this led to a square-off between AJ and Nakamura, a callback to their old rivalry dating all the way back to New Japan Pro Wrestling. They went back and forth, and eventually it was Styles who got the better of the exchange, nailing Nakamura with the phenomenal forearm, but Roddy Strong was on hand to throw Styles out of the ring and get the pinfall on Nakamura. 3-1-1 to NXT, and they're just so cerebral. They've really been thinking this through, haven't they? Next up, arguably, maybe my favourite match of the night, and a very NXT takeover style match, which is no surprise because it was the NXT Championship match between Adam Cole and Pete Dunne. Both guys were banged up, especially Adam Cole, of course, because Tommaso Ciampa attempted to murder him on TakeOver War Games. Adam Cole was selling the wrist and the ribs, Pete Dunne was selling his injured knee, and both guys did a really good job of targeting those respective body parts and selling them when they themselves were attacked. In fact, this match was just such a good example to me of how both guys are excellent wrestlers, not only doing like the really big moves and the big spots well and the fast exchanges and everything, but even the dead space in between moves. They're really good at packing so much emotion even into the parts of the match that maybe aren't as eye-catching. Things gradually escalated and this became a really compelling match down the stretch. At one point, Adam Cole kicked out of Pete Dunne's bitter end finisher, and then when Pete Dunne went for that Daniel Bryan step-up backflip out of the corner, Adam Cole hung back and super kicked him while he was upside down. We've seen him do it to Ricochet, we've seen him do it on various occasions, and it never fails to amaze me just how accurate he is with those super kicks. Cole then hit an astonishing Panama Sunrise on the apron. They both fell to the outside. Cole got back in. Pete Dunne just beat the count at 9, but was immediately met with a big super kick from Adam Cole. His mouth guard flew out and everything. 1-2, and Pete Dunne kicked out, and by this point the crowd were on the edge of their seats. As a last resort, Dunne broke the fingers of Adam Cole, went for another bitter end, but Cole reversed it into a destroyer and then hit the last shot, and that was enough to retain the NXT Championship. A wonderful match, a great demonstration of why both guys are two of the best in the world in my opinion, and yeah, possibly match of the night. Next up, the Universal Championship match, or as many people on Twitter have said, the Blue Universal Championship match, between The Fiend and Daniel Bryan. Now the first thing to point out is that, oh no, it looks like the red light is here to stay for The Fiend's matches. It wasn't just reserved for the feud with Seth Rollins. It looks like we're going to have all of The Fiend matches under this red light. But Daniel Bryan tried his best to inject some excitement into the opening stages anyway, attacking The Fiend from the bell and really going for it straight off the bat. But The Fiend was able to fight back and it became a bit of an even contest for a while. After a few minutes, it sort of settled into that normal rhythm of Fiend matches, the recent ones we've seen with Seth Rollins, where basically the Fiend's opponent just unloads on him and he kind of no-sells everything or survives everything, and the opponent's always like, what do I do? What do I do? But Daniel Bryan, in fairness, didn't waste a lot of time with that, not as much as Seth Rollins did. He went for it, and even went for like a roll-up at one point, which I thought was really smart, because if you can't destroy the Fiend, why not just try and out-wrestle him and pin his shoulders to the mat? So I enjoyed that little aspect of it, but for the most part, this was maybe one of the more underwhelming matches on the card. And that wasn't the fault of either man's performance in the match, it was more just the formula that they've kind of forced these Fiend matches to have. I think that, yes, they do need to be unique in some way, but not necessarily in this way. Anyway, the Fiend was able to kick out of the running knee, and then he managed to catch Bryan a little bit later on in the mandible claw and sort of slowly lower his shoulders down to the canvas. 1, 2, 3, and the Fiend retained and had a pretty astonishingly straightforward victory over Daniel Bryan. Next up, the men's Survivor Series match. This was a long one and a lot of stuff happened, so there's quite a lot to discuss here. The teams were as follows. Team Raw was Seth Rollins, who was rocking some Chicago Bulls style gear, but a lot of people on Twitter pointed out that he looked like a member of Team Rocket. Randy Orton, Drew McIntyre, Ricochet, and Kevin Owens, who swore to Rollins earlier in the night in a backstage promo that he was loyal to the brand, but he questioned Rollins' loyalty, and at the end of the day, yeah, they were both loyal to their brands. Team SmackDown was Roman Reigns, King Corbin, both of whom considered themselves the team leaders. That led to friction later on, which we'll discuss. Braun Strowman, Mustafa Ali, and everyone's favourite, Shorty G. Can't we just call him Chad Gable again, please? And Team NXT, Tommaso Ciampa, Matt Riddle, Keith Lee, Damian Priest, and from NXT UK, Walter. Walter was easily the most over guy in the early stages of this match. We got a big three-way square-off between the three big lads of each respective team. So we had Drew McIntyre, Walter, and who was the one on Team SmackDown? Oh, Braun Strowman, of course it was. They were all chopping each other, throwing each other around, shoulder blocking each other. It was really exciting stuff to kick things off. But out of nowhere, bang! Drew McIntyre with the Claymore kick, and Walter was the first man eliminated, which I think was a bit of an oversight in this match, to be honest. We'll talk about it later, but I really enjoyed this pretty much from start to finish, but not this aspect of it. I would have liked to have seen Walter last a while longer, actually. This was a shockingly quick elimination for him, and it was a very unpopular one with the crowd. They let themselves... They booed this, they let their feelings be known. Ricochet was able to take down Shorty G and tagging Kevin Owens, who got the next elimination with a big frog splash onto the short one, the short man. The smaller than average man. He's not even that short, really, in the grand scheme of things, come on now, but he was gone from the match. Now this is where the problem over the leadership of Team SmackDown reared its head, because Roman Reigns and King Corbin, couldn't work out who was next in the ring. They had a little argument between each other, and Corbin was just really cross at him, to be honest. This led to Kevin Owens getting sick of their argument, super kicking Roman Reigns, sending him to the outside, and the action spilled out there for a little bit. Owens followed the action to the outside, hit Baron Corbin with the stunner, King Corbin, again, rolled Corbin back into the ring, but then as Owens was getting back in the ring, Ciampa caught him with a draping DDT and eliminated Owens from the match. Another man that everyone was really keen to see in this bout, gone pretty early on, and again people booed, not quite as heavily as they did for the Walter elimination, but it was still an unpopular decision, I think, by whoever laid out this match. Now it was Randy Orton's time to shine, one of the best Survivor Series performers in WWE history. He hit an RKO on Ciampa, but Ciampa had already sneakily tagged out to Damian Priest, so then Priest got in, and then Orton hit an RKO on him and eliminated him. So I was like, well, what's the point of that? The point of that became very clear because Matt Riddle ran into the ring, rolled up Randy Orton, and got the big elimination. Unfortunately, Riddle didn't last much longer, but I don't have too much of an issue with this elimination because he did get his big moment, the elimination of Randy Orton, which is pretty sweet for him. Orton was annoyed, of course, and hit an RKO after he'd been eliminated on Riddle in revenge, and this allowed King Corbin to steal the pinfall and eliminate poor Matt Riddle. Bro, I'm not cool at all. The action once again spilled to the outside with various people recovering around the ring, and you know what that means. It's time for Braun Strowman to do his big runny round thing. There were some great bumps in this, from Ciampa, who flew over the barricade, to Ricochet, who just like turned 360 in the air, but then he went around for a second time and just let Rollins be. He just walked past Rollins and just sort of went, I don't want to hit you. Why not? What's wrong, Braun? Your team's SmackDown, mate. Press the advantage. The advantage was not pressed, and Keith Lee put a stop to Strowman's charge with a big sort of splash of his own, a big kind of crossbody, and both men were down on the outside. But then Drew McIntyre came along, Claymore kick to Braun Strowman. McIntyre and Keith Lee both made it back into the ring, but Strowman was unable to and was counted out of the match. Now, it was Ricochet's time to shine with his high-octane offense, which is a bad sign if you're a fan of Ricochet, because as you may have noticed in these Survivor Series matches, as soon as someone builds a head of steam and starts hitting all their signature moves, that means they're going to get eliminated pretty soon. And this was the case for Ricochet, who missed a 450 off the top onto Keith Lee, but he landed on his feet, rolled through, and straight into an end of days from Corbin, and poor Trevor was out of the match. Now, another bad sign if you're a fan of Mustafa Ali, it was his turn to run wild with a bit of exciting offense, blind tagging in off Corbin and dishing out his own form of offense. But then Corbin got annoyed at this because he blind tagged in and had a little argument with Ali on the outside. With Ali distracted, this led to his elimination. As he was getting back into the ring, he walked straight into a curb stomp from Seth Rollins. And this was another unpopular elimination actually, because Ali's from Chicago, Illinois, and we were in Chicago, Illinois. Maybe don't have Seth Rollins, of all people, in 2019 eliminate the hometown hero. Team Raw, which is now just Rollins and Drew McIntyre, remember, they fired up and started to run wild a little bit, which is, again, as we know, is a bad sign for at least one member of the Raw team, and it was Drew McIntyre. He was measuring, I think, Ciampa for the Claymore kick, but then Roman Reigns came in and speared him out of his boots and eliminated poor Drew. That, of course, meant that Rollins was on his own for Team Raw, but could he represent the red brand properly, assert #brand supremacy, and burn it down? Meanwhile, Corbin was just furious at Roman Reigns. I'm just gonna throw it out there. I don't think Corbin was very good for his team's chemistry. He physically dragged Roman over to the corner at one point because he was taking a long time to recover and make the hot tag. So Corbin just moved him over himself, got back on the apron, tagged himself in, and got in the ring. And then instead of going on the offense, he turned around to Roman again and started shouting at him. Bad team captaincy from Corbin, really. But it came back to bite Corbin because Roman Reigns just decided to spear him. What dick? He doesn't care about SmackDown at all. All the efforts of all the other SmackDown superstars throughout the show has just all been for nothing because Roman Reigns was annoyed at Baron Corbin. We've all been annoyed at Baron Corbin from time to time. I can sort of understand. But yeah, Roman just took out his own teammate and that allowed Ciampa to get the pin and eliminate Corbin. And this meant that Roman, for all of his anger, I suppose, for all of his frustration, it meant that he was on his own for Team SmackDown. But Roman did have an unlikely ally, an old ally, in the form of Seth Rollins. They even went for a shield bomb on Ciampa on the outside, but couldn't quite get it done. I think Keith Lee saved Ciampa from quite a grisly fate through the announce table. I wonder if they couldn't get it done quickly enough because they were missing a certain third member of the team. That's right, the third member of the Shield, Kurt Angle. The action moved back into the ring where Tommaso Ciampa hit a lovely Project Ciampa on Seth Rollins, a crunching Project Ciampa, 1, 2, but Rollins kicked out. Roman then basically helped Rollins eliminate Ciampa. He just helped Rollins fight back and get his way back into the match, and then Rollins was able to hit the curb stomp on Ciampa, and that meant that every team was down to one member. Roman for SmackDown, Rollins for Raw, and quite an unlikely one given the pecking order of the team, Keith Lee for NXT. Lee battled bravely against, the two far more established superstars, the two more established names in WWE, but eventually it seemed like it was kind of taking its toll on him. And remember, he was part of that War Games match last night as well. And eventually, Seth Rollins kind of just started taunting him, said, "I built NXT and now I'll tear it down." Just turn him heel again. Just turn Seth Rollins heel again. He's a fantastic heel. Please, please turn him heel again. Anyway, he set up for the stomp, hit the stomp, and Keith Lee was eliminated. No, I'm joking. Keith Lee avoided the stomp and hit, I think it was a jackhammer. They called it out on commentary. I'm not sure if it's got its own name, but he squashed Seth Rollins with this move. 1, 2, 3. Keith Lee eliminated Seth Rollins, and it was down to Lee versus Roman Reigns. And the crowd, understandably, were well behind Keith Lee at this point. Roman hit the Superman punch, Lee kicked out, and Corey Graves on commentary made way too much of a big deal about the referee almost hitting the mat for a 3 count. Just move on. He went on about this for absolutely ages. But anyway, Keith Lee with a humongous spirit bomb on Roman Reigns. 1, 2, massive near fall. If that had ended the match, I think the roof would have come off the arena. Keith Lee went up top looking for the moonsault, and at this point, if CM Punk had walked out in Chicago, I still don't think the crowd would have really minded too much because Keith Lee was the most over man in wrestling for these few minutes. He went for the moonsault, Roman avoided it, hit the spear, and became the sole survivor, and won the match for SmackDown as well. This made the score 3 to NXT, 2 to SmackDown, and 1 to Raw, and Roman Reigns showed a nice touch of respect to Keith Lee after the final bell. Oh man, what a roller coaster that was. I loved this match. I questioned some of the early booking decisions, like the eliminations of Walter and Kevin Owens, for example, who really didn't get enough time to shine, either of those guys, in the match. But down the stretch, this was excellent drama. And when they do a traditional Survivor Series match right, it can just be one of the most uniquely thrilling things in the WWE calendar. I love a traditional Survivor Series match, and with this addition of Team NXT as well, I thought it was great. Maybe even a touch better than the women's one at the start of the show, but I enjoyed both of them very much. And next up, after all of that, we have a short match to talk about, thankfully. Brock Lesnar defending the WWE Championship against Rey Mysterio in a no DQ match. Heyman's introduction at the start was very funny. He announced Brock Lesnar as weighing in at 285 pounds, or about 2.5 Rey Mysterios. Paul That's just mean. Ray ran out of the ring and got his pipe immediately, a wise move, but Lesnar was able to get it off him and start just chucking him around the ringside area, and then loads of suplexes, of course. It's the Lesnar strategy back in the ring. To be honest, there looked to be no way back for Ray. Lesnar was just dominating and dominating the far smaller man, and then shades of AEW full gear, as not MJF, but Dominic Mysterio came out with a towel and looked to be about to throw it to surrender the match, even though, you know, it's his father and stuff. He doesn't want to see him get, you know, beaten up or anything. So he's about to throw the towel in. Lesnar snatched it off him, threw it out of the ring, and basically said, no, the punishment's not over yet. He even laid his hands on Dominic. He was going to beat him up again, but then Ray came in with a low blow from behind, and Lesnar sold it brilliantly. Lesnar is such an underrated seller because he doesn't do it very often. And then Dominic with a low blow of his own, and Lesnar sold it like he'd been absolutely just hoofed in the ball. Well, he'd been punched in the balls, like an uppercut, but he sold it really, really well. And then, this was just such an electrifying period of the match. Dominic and Ray looked at each other as Lesnar, you know, cleverly fell into position across the middle rope, and they went for a double 619. Dominic had his 619 was on point. Are any of us surprised? He is Rey Mysterio's son. And then he went up top and did a splash as well, and then Ray did a splash. They both covered Lesnar. I was like, can it be? In this moment, I really wanted it to happen. I wanted Ray to win this match with the help of his son. 1, 2, Lesnar kicked out, and both of them flew off the top of him, and for a split second, it was almost glorious. It's still, you know, I still really enjoyed this match, but I wish that the referee had counted 3. Dominic then headed up top again, but Lesnar, you know, burst back to life, grabbed him, hit a big German suplex. Ray jumped off the top, Lesnar caught him, F5, 1, 2, 3. Lesnar's still the WWE champion, but if he keeps having matches like this, I'm not going to complain too much about it. This was great stuff. Well done, Lesnar, well done, Ray, and well done, Dominic, as well. Pretty much everything he did went off without a hitch. I was disappointed when they announced the no DQ stip for that match. I really wanted to see how unique a singles match would be between, you know, Lesnar and Rey Mysterio, but I have to admit I was totally wrong. The no DQ stipulation made this even more thrilling, and I loved it from start to finish. One of the highlights of the show, for sure. And finally, the main event, the rather uniquely positioned main event, I suppose. A lot of people were a little bit surprised to see Becky Lynch versus Shayna Baszler versus Bayley in the main slot of the show. And a lot of people on Twitter immediately assumed that this would mean a return for Ronda Rousey, perhaps helping Shayna Baszler to win the match. But that's not what happened, and perhaps because the crowd were expecting this, or perhaps just because they've been burnt out by the long men's Survivor Series elimination match and then the really short and action-packed Ray versus Lesnar match, they were pretty dead for this. They were really burned out. This wasn't like the best match on the card or anything, but it wasn't a bad match by any stretch of the imagination. But the crowd really treated it like it was a bad match, I guess because, yeah, they were just so tired and burned out. But there were a few boring chants, like, not loads, like a few individual voices chanting boring or CM Punk. And I have to say, like, when the women are busting their asses in the ring like this, don't do that. You know, they're trying really hard. It's not their fault that they're on at the end of a pretty action-packed show. I mean, when Becky Lynch is giving a huge powerbomb to the much larger Shayna Baszler and the crowd are reacting like nothing's happened, you know there's a bit of an issue here. I suggest this probably should have been earlier on in the card. I know that, like, these are 3 of the most over women in the entire promotion, but at the same time, in this instance, with the way the card had gone beforehand, I do have to question putting it on last. Maybe Lesnar versus Ray would have made more sense as the main event because it was short and explosive. But anyway, there was still hashtag brand supremacy to play for here. SmackDown could level it up if Bayley won. Obviously NXT would win because they were in the lead anyway. If Shayna won, Raw were out of it. They had no chance. Becky could just win for pride, I suppose. Towards the end, Shayna Baszler threw Becky Lynch over the announce table, and it all seemed to come down to her versus Bayley in the ring. Bayley seemed to have the upper hand, but then Baszler evaded the big elbow from the top, clamped on the Kirifuda clutch, and then Bayley just tapped out. And I guess because of the lack of crowd reaction throughout, it wasn't immediately apparent that this was the closing stretch of the match. So when Bayley did tap out, everyone kind of just went, oh, that's the end then. NXT win. Yes, indeed, NXT did win. 4-2-1. 4 to NXT, 2 to SmackDown, and 1 to poor old Monday Night Raw. Not a good look for the flagship brand of WWE. Well, they had a bit of a clean sweep last year, didn't they? So they can't complain too much. Shayna celebrated her victory on the announce table with her NXT Women's Championship, and then Becky Lynch, with that John Cena sore loser energy, rose up from behind her, beat her down, and leg dropped her through the announce table. Becky! You lost fair and square, mate. Don't be like that. And that brought an end to Survivor Series 2019. As I said at the start of this video, in my mind, one of the best, if not the best, non-takeover WWE pay-per-views of 2019. I really enjoyed it. The main event was a bit questionable just because of the dead crowd, I suppose, but Ray versus Brock was great, the elimination matches were great, and Pete Dunne and Adam Cole absolutely tore the house down. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.